Well, Cam, we've been watching two versions of this film now, so much so that we might as well be married to it. And if we were married to it, our guest might well be our in-law because joining us is an Emmy nominated screenwriter and director. His credits include The Craft, Barefoot Hamlet 2, and this week's film, of course, The In-Laws. It's the one and only Andrew Fleming. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hello, hello. Uh, Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you aboard, sir. We have a lot of questions about the in-laws to get into. Um, but before I think we embark on that journey, let's talk about you a little bit and your journey because there was some films before, definitely before you got to the in-laws. I mentioned some of them in the intro, but what made you want to get started in this business of show in the first place?
Um, I was a very artsy, fartsy kid, uh, like to draw and write and things like that, and made films. My father and my best friend's father had the same Nizo Super 8 camera,
Hmm.
and we made little films on there. And then I kind of kept making more and more elaborate films, and wanted to be an architect and things, but I just felt I grew up in Los Angeles around the film business, sort of on the margins of it. My
Hmm.
my parents were in it, but really marginally. But it wasn't an improbable thing to do in my
Mm.
world. My friends' parents worked on TV shows and directed commercials and things like that. So I just kind of fell into it and went to film school and made a lot of films and won a few awards. And actually, the crazy part of the story is that I graduated and I had written an outline with some friends at NYU. And then I said, well, do you guys want to write this together? They said no. I said, well, I'll just write a draft of this horror movie called Bad Dreams. And I had gotten an agent from my short films at NYU, and I gave him the script, and he sent it to Gail Ann Hurd, who had just produced Aliens. And she had a meeting with me, and she said, "Okay." Like I graduated film school, and within a year, I sold the script, and a year later, I was directing the movie for 20th Century Fox, and I was 23, 24 years old. It was an insane story. Um, but the movie didn't do that well. And then I struggled. Then it was about 5 years before I got another job. But it was a very
Hmm.
strange thing getting a feature film at a studio right out of college. And then it got more complicated and difficult. But yeah, that's my origin story in a nutshell.
Well, I mean, you're that young directing a film. How did you find your bearings? Because that would be incredibly overwhelming.
At NYU, I'd made, I would say 30 short films, some of them very
Mm.
short, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. And then I had made two that were more complicated, that were half-hour films. Um, that I wrote and directed. And then I made one that was half animated, half live action, and that was about 6 minutes. And that film won a lot of awards, and it played at the
Hmm.
Museum of Modern Art, and it got it got distribution. Like when HBO started, they would play short films in between the movies, and it played on HBO. So I had a reel, and then I had the script, and I had a lot of confidence. I don't even think I have anymore. I was convinced I could do it. And the truth is, if you make a movie with professional crew, it's easier than when you do it at film school and you're begging everybody to do it for free. Suddenly everybody knows what they're doing and they show up on time and they're good at it. And it was easier in one sense, but it was just so much more complicated and difficult. And um, I was very confident. I felt like I knew what I was doing visually. I think other parts of it, I don't know. It was a horror movie. And so horror movies, you understand what the goal is. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. It's a lot of luck, I think.
I mean, that's sort of the question I usually jump into afterwards. But it's interesting your story having that initial launch with Bad Dreams and that sort of really good, successful first year coming out of college. because I would usually ask, what was the big break for you? What was the moment where it all turned? But it felt like you sort of had that rush really early on and then had to fight afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I was flavor of the moment. People were so freaked out that a 23-year-old made a deal at a studio. And, agents were kind of flocking around, and there was a lot of thing. And then the movie kind of came out, and people went, meh, meh. And I did too. I wasn't that happy with the movie at the time. I'm much more affectionate about it now. But I kind of regrouped. I went to an acting class, and I'd studied acting and acted a little bit in college. But I went through this program, the Meisner technique, which was taught at the neighborhood playhouse, and did it full time, not to become an actor, but to better understand how that works.
Hmm.
And it didn't really teach me much about directing, but it taught me a lot about writing. And one of the exercises in that class, an improv, um, it developed into this relationship in the scene. And I was like, I recognized this relationship, and it was something that had happened in college. And so I started writing an outline. And that turned into this movie called Threesome, which was very personal and very funny, very kinky, dirty, crazy for the time, and a very little tiny movie that would have been easy to produce. And that that got a lot of attention. Everybody wanted that script. And that was kind of the break because I was using myself and my life and finding, I hate to use this kind of phrase, but my voice. It was me. You know what I mean? It was the sort of thing that I should be doing. It was funny, um and I got that movie made, and that really turned things around. That movie, Threesome. It went to Sundance, and it got good reviews, and it, made it a little money. So that was really the start of things.
And it's interesting that, that movie's a little bit like a lighter tone than what Bad Dreams is.
Yeah,
And then
yes.
you're kind of like pairing the two a little bit with The Craft, which isn't
Yeah,
a comedy, but it has sort of that dark comedy element mixed with the effects spectacle you would expect with horror.
it's a very good point. After I had done Bad Dreams, I said I don't want to do another horror movie. And so I did Threesome, and I thought I'm much more comfortable doing this, like
Hmm.
behavior and funniness and characterization. And then I got sent a script of a draft of The Craft, and I said I don't want to direct this, but I'll do a rewrite on it. And I came in and pitched a lot of ideas and really rewrote it pretty drastically. And as I was working on it, I realized that I was kind of getting invested. I was getting uh, uh, it put a spell on me, so to speak. And I said, I want to direct this. And it's funny now, I look back at it and I realize that the a lot of the reason that movie works is because some of it is funny, that it's not just bleak horror, but it's kind of fun. It's dark, but it's dark fun. Um, and that it was truly kind of a combination of the two.
What is it that drew you to comedy? Because when I look at your larger filmography, a lot of it is comedy. What was it about that to you is sort of appealing?
It was in film school, everybody made very, very serious films. And
Hmm.
I like to laugh. I like funny stuff. And one of my professors said, why don't you make a funny movie? Um, so I started doing that a little bit. And at the time, there was serious film, and then comedy was like Harold Ramis. Mr. Mom. It was not stylish. It was funny, clever, but it wasn't visually interesting and it wasn't complicated. And I saw this movie After Hours by Martin
Yeah.
Scorsese, and I thought it was hilarious. I mean, I thought it was one of the funniest things I'd ever seen, but I also felt it was very familiar. I'd had a night like that. in, New York in the 80s. But it was also very, very stylish and had layers. It was
Mhm.
complex. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I would like to do comedy that isn't, straightforward. To do a comedy that you couldn't necessarily see on TV. Um, so that was kind of the goal, going forward.
And it's an interesting one because you do the craft and you follow it up with Dick and the sort of an alternate history tale, but
Yeah.
still lighthearted. And when we were doing our research for the film we're going to talk about in a minute, and I saw your name attached to it, I thought the craft. I thought Dick, and I thought it's an interesting through line to get to the in-laws. I'm sure we'll talk about how that came to be.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have pictured those two films like that. That's what I think of your films, and then I see that you do the in-laws. I was like, oh, that seems very different for him. That's an interesting turn.
Yeah.
So, like, how did that begin? Let's get into the in-laws. How did that? Because I say you mentioned you'd done Dick at that point. You did a couple
Yeah.
of episodes of Gross Point, and then the in-laws comes along. So, how does that story begin for you?
In a pretty conventional way. I got sent the script and they were looking for a director. And uh, the Dick was not a very big hit, but it was very, very, very well received.
Mhm.
It was it was this moment where everybody in comedy went to watch that movie. It gave me this like cred in the
Mhm.
comedy world. Said every Saturday Night Live person saw the movie, every serious comedy writer, director, actor saw it, and it gave me this entree to that world. So it was nice to move forward and to have that kind of street cred, comedy comedy cred. Um, but I was sent the script, and Michael Douglas was attached, and I just had a meeting with the producers, and I had a couple of ideas about they felt like that the script was maybe kind of too big, kind of going in too many different directions about how to kind of concentrate it, but not to do a huge rewrite on it. I really just kind of shaped it and edited it a bit. And then I went to go meet Michael, uh, and because he was producing it as well as
Mhm.
starring in it. And that was really the thing. I mean, and he had loved that movie Dick, and he was Catherine was shooting. I think she was shooting Chicago up there,
Mm.
and went to his house and had a really nice conversation. And then we went out to dinner, and it turned into a kind of crazy evening, which I don't need to go into detail about. But
Oh, you're teasing.
no, I mean, it was a super fun meeting, and then we met for drinks. And I had some friends in Toronto from shooting Dick there, and they wanted to shoot the in-laws in Toronto. So it was nice. I felt like I could just kind of slip into it
Mhm.
and know the lay of the land. But we went to Renee Zellweger's apartment for a party there.
As you do.
It was a long day. I flew from Las Vegas, landed, met with Michael, and he said, "Well, let's meet for drinks later." So we met for drinks, and then he said, "We're going to a party," and it just like this day kept going on and on and on. But it was kind of like the movie in a way because at that point in time, Catherine and Michael were really the most famous movie star couple. They were really,
Mhm.
before Bennifer, before all of that. And if you walked down the street with them, people would go, "Whoa!" And so in their wake, I would just walk behind them. There was a kind of, uh, really enjoyable chaos happening, and they're both lovely people too.
Well, did you have a relationship with the original film when you were approached about this?
I'd seen it, and I remembered it well, and I love, Peter Falk and Alan Arkin, but I don't think I was an acolyte of it, and
Mm.
I actually intentionally avoided watching it because I thought people respect that movie a lot, and I don't, the truth is when I got the script, it wasn't called The In-Laws, it was called I think Till Death Do Us Part, and it doesn't really take that much from the movie. It takes the premise, but there are very few specific scenes. There's no serpentine, none of those things are in it.
Yeah.
Um, and there was a very complicated situation with the title of the script. Um, People didn't want to, the studio was reluctant to release a movie that has death in the title. I was like, well, it's a spy movie, but it was a comedy, so I kind of understood. And we 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 changed to, I think, the wedding party or something like that with the word wedding in the title, which is a very contentious thing to do because certain studios feel that you can't call a movie a wedding movie because there were a lot of wedding movies at the time.
Hmm.
So we ended up just going back to the in-laws, and I wish we hadn't. I mean, I don't have many regrets about my career, but I wish I had fought hard to not call that movie The In-Laws because it forced the comparison, and people had very, very fond memories of that movie.
Yeah.
Um, so, but hindsight is 2020. But I really wish we had not called it The In-Laws.
I mean, it's a fair thing to point out. I mean, I'm no lover of the original personally when we spoke about it before, and it's interesting to see how it has evolved with your version of the film, and we'll get into that. And so like, it's nice to know that you were trying to do your own spin on it because we see a lot of remakes nowadays, especially in recent years, where they were very much let's just carbon copy the film that came
Yeah,
before, maybe stick a new title on it, and just let's call it a thing. Um, I appreciate that you gave it its own spin, and there are moments, touchstones that you go back to. There's the wedding,
sure.
and there's that sort of stuff's in it. But yeah, it has its own story. So I guess then, did you feel any trepidation apart from perhaps the title, which we spoke about taking on this? I mean, is it a cult classic? I'm not sure what you call the original In-Laws, but
Yeah,
it
it's a
does
very
have some
fondly
legacy.
remembered movie, the
Yeah.
original. Very, very fondly remembered. A little bit, but I had never done a sequel. I'd never done a remake. So I didn't have a personal, grasp on um, what that meant. But
Mm.
I remember one of the things I really liked about it is that my first movie was a very young cast. The lead was, 22 or something. The second movie was college age kids. The third movie was high school. The fourth movie was high school. And I was really thinking like it would be so nice to make a movie where there is not a scene by the lockers after chemistry, with
Yeah.
grown-ups.
Mm.
And they've been kind of girl-centric movies, and I like this. I was two male movie stars. Um, and I was just a fan of Michael's. Like I was, wanted to do that, do a grown-up movie with grown-ups and a grown-up budget. It was, I never really thought this is treacherous. And it wasn't really treacherous. It's just movies. It's not a big deal. But yeah, I think if we hadn't called it The In-Laws, people would compare the movie so much to the original. Because, Peter Falk and Ellen Arkin are brilliant. They are brilliant. And but I feel like Michael Douglas and Albert Brooks are kind of brilliant too. So it's all it's all fine.
Well, you raised something there. How did Albert Brooks get involved with the project?
Um, well, when I came on board, there were a couple of names floating around, and his among them, and I just said, if we could get Albert Brooks in this movie, I mean, why would we not do that? And Michael liked the idea, and so I had a meeting with him, and I'm such a fan of his as a director, writer, actor. I just think he's, brilliant, as is Michael. And I had this meeting, and I don't remember what happened. There were a lot of people in the room, but I do remember saying this thing, which was absolutely true, which is that, when I direct, I ask myself things like, what would Mike Nichols do? What would Stanley Kubrick do? And I said this to him. I said those two names, and I asked myself sometimes, what would Albert Brooks do?
Mm.
And and that's true. And I think he sensed how much I respected him. And he'd watched Dick and he liked it, and he thought, let's do it. And and I loved them. I loved working with the two of them. They were great together. We were like um, contrasting personalities. in life and in the movie too.
I have to ask, what is your go-to Albert Brooks film?
Um, oh, well, I love I mean I love all of them. I love all of them. It's funny. I think he's so brilliant in broadcast news. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think there's some amazing moments in all of his movies. You know, by the way, the nest egg, that was improvised. That was not in the script. He told me that. But I think he's so brilliant in broadcast news um, as an actor. That's when I think of him, I think of him in that movie. But yeah, they're all brilliant. He was also brilliant in that movie. What was it? Drive with Ryan Gosling.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He which is after the in-laws, but he does this thing in that movie. He plays like a villain, which is a brilliant thing, where he kills Bryan Cranston,
Yeah.
and he does it in this way that's so casual and uh, and ruthless. He just slashes his wrist and says, "It's going to be fine. Don't worry. Just sit down. Just be fine." And it was so disturbing to me uh, when he did that.
Yeah, it
Uh,
had a bit of the twist of like when Robin Williams first played villains, where you're like,
yeah,
oh, he's really good at this in a
yeah,
way you wouldn't expect. And it doesn't feel like a gimmick. It feels like
no,
these are guys who had that ability to communicate that and just no one
yeah.
saw that in them until those projects.
And Albert is kind of cuddly and funny and warm and approachable, but there's also a ruthlessness to him. Like
Mm-hmm.
he wants to get to the bottom of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he's a serious, very, very, brilliant guy. Uh, Descendant of Albert Einstein's, like,
Mm-hmm.
by the way.
Yeah. And I was gonna ask because you mentioned your earlier films were built around young actors. Just the difference in directing a film with not just older actors, but like movie stars, legitimate icons almost across the board.
Yeah. It was different. Um, it was it was easier and then more work in another way. I mean, when you work with young actors, you're also kind of a teacher and a therapist, and you're kind of helping them get to where they need to go. So I think it's good to work with young actors because you become a better director. You have to help them more. I mean, occasionally young actors are just brilliant and they don't need any help, but sometimes you really have to help them shape a performance. And you don't have to do that with Albert or Michael, but I found that when I directed younger actors, I would kind of let them like, do you want to come in there? Do you want to? I was kind of loose and would let the scene evolve. And that with Albert and Michael, what I realized very quickly what I need to do was come in and work everything out. So that I say, come in here, pause there, come in here, you say their line there, and then use your right hand to grab it. Just work everything out for them. And they just wanted that. They
Mm.
wanted the ability to come in, do three takes and go. Albert liked to do a lot of takes. Um, but yeah, I feel like I learned how to be a much better director doing that by working everything out for especially Michael.
I know Cam moved us on to that question, but I actually wanted to dive back into the cast for a second because alongside the leads, you've got a couple of coups in here. You've got a quite young in the game Ryan Reynolds. You've obviously got
Yeah.
Robin Tunney coming back from The Craft. You've got Candice Bergen turning up. There's a lot of great names in here. What was assembling that cast like? And did you know that you'd struck gold with quite a few of them there?
I'd worked with Ryan. He had a small part in Dick. He played
Oh.
this guy that Kirsten makes out with. Kirsten,
Mhm.
he plays H.R. Haldeman's son. He's in two scenes. Um, and I thought he was talented. And we were shooting in Canada, and he's Canadian, so I mean, not that that mattered. We for those parts, we just tested a lot of people. We auditioned a lot of people and narrowed it down. It was a more conventional casting process. The part of Candace, we there were a couple of we kind of like the idea of reteaming him with one of his famous co-stars, so we kind of went down that road for a little while. You can do the math. But I loved Candace. I just think she's brilliant, and I was just so happy she did it. She's a lovely person. I love working with her. Um, who else isn't it? Oh, the guy who plays the crazy villain, David Suchet.
David
Yeah.
Suchet, a living legend here in the Britain, certainly. It's
Yeah.
lovely to see him.
In fact, I was having dinner with him in the middle of the shooting the night he got his OBE, I think. It was
Hmm.
OBE. But anyway, um, he's so brilliant. And we were flopping about trying to find people who are kind of, I guess the mistake was always it was somebody who had played a villain before. And he came in and just did the table read. We were like 2 weeks from shooting. He came in as a favor. He was in LA and he did the table read, and he was so good. He was so funny. We just said, "Oh, let's get him." And I know that the casting director Pam Dixon, that was her plan all along. She, she, yeah. But I loved him. He's kind of steals every scene he's in.
With that character, how much is on the page versus how much is being found just working with the actor and kind of on set?
Um, a lot of it was on the page, but he was so great at kind of picking things out. Like there's this thing where Albert's talking about uh, some fake, foot disease called wet bone, and
Hmm.
and we just thought that wet bone was really funny, and we kept saying like he repeated it, wet bone, and like I don't know, you could really riff with Albert, and they did a lot. They were so funny together. I love them.
That was something I was going to actually ask about. When you have your two leads, Michael Douglas and then Albert Brooks, who comes from such a comedy background and as you said, like to do multiple takes and maybe have improv. How do you kind of juggle that where you have two actors in a comedy with different approaches to how to do comedy?
Um, I don't know if they had different approaches because Michael can stay in the moment,
Hmm.
and that's all improv is, just staying in the moment, staying alive. It was just that Michael liked to do like 3 takes, whereas Albert you could stay there all day and he could do 27. So I really had, it was a matter of in the scenes where, they're walking together side by side, steady cam. That was the tricky part. If we were doing one side and then the other, it was fine because you can let each have as many takes as they want. But Albert wanted to work things out more. He wanted to know like which hand and like what's happens with his sleeve, with the thing, and which pocket. And he really wanted to work all that stuff out and talk about it, which is fine. I'm up for that. But they met in the middle. I mean, is really the story of it. They really liked uh, working together, and I think they kind of kept a distance from each other. But it was interesting when we did the press at the end. They did all of their press together, and they just had the best time, doing interviews together, and they were cracking each other up. And I was like, that's really nice. I'm glad they kind of found that social moment together. But
Well,
I
wait,
will also say making this movie was maybe the most fun I ever had doing a movie. It was all these toys and all these funny people. And there was this desire, like, well, let's go out to dinner. Let's have a party on Saturday. It was very social. It was a lot of fun.
well, when you have a producer like Michael Douglas, how many doors does that open?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was, yes, like we were shooting in Chicago. We shot in Toronto and we shot in Chicago, and we got a reservation to go to Charlie Trotter's in the last minute, and we all went and had this dinner and went into the kitchen and met Charlie, and yeah, it was yes, it opens those kinds of doors. It helped us get locations for sure. Um, no, it was the biggest budget movie I ever made. Um,
Hmm.
So that was exciting. I mean, at one point, I think we had 5 different units going. I was directing 2 units on the stage, and there were 3 different units shooting aerial stuff, shooting explosions at an airport. It was a big big giant monster, but it was fun.
Well, that actually leads me to the question I had queued up in my brain about the spy of it all, because that's what we do here on Spy Hards. We talk about spy films, and with a surname like Fleming, it felt like it was fated that eventually you
Yes.
would tackle the spy film.
Uncle Ian.
Yeah. I mean, had you been a fan of the genre up to that point? Is it something you particularly followed? And what was it like taking on a spy story?
Well, I love James Bond movies, and that was really kind of what we delved into. Um, but yeah, obsessively a fan of James Bond movies, and the reality of espionage, we didn't really delve into it. It wasn't that. This is a movie
Hmm.
about parents and a wedding and shenanigans and crazy personalities. And we really tried to keep the espionage part to a minimum. I mean, the that opening sequence with the plane and the chase and all of that stuff, that was weeks and weeks and weeks of work. But it was fun. It was amazing I think it was the first time where everything I asked for I got in terms of equipment, time, extras, production, design, all of it. I didn't hear no.
Hmm.
Well,
Um,
I'll continue down that rabbit hole because you mentioned you're a Bond fan, and of course you're now among friends with us, so that's good to hear.
yeah,
Um, you mentioned that opening sequence. There is a pretty famous Bond song being played there in
yes.
the background.
And I can tell you a really interesting story about that.
Mm,
Um, we tried a couple of different songs over that, and nothing worked. But that worked. That was just we put it down. There was a rough assembly of the opening, and we put that song down, and this sort of magic thing happened where a chord hit like an explosion, and then a chord hit like an impact, and it just like magically sunk up. It doesn't happen ever. It happens one out of 100 times that something syncs up like that. And I thought we have to get this song. And then so I called our music supervisor, and he said, you can't get Bond songs because MGM owns the rights to them and they won't license Bond songs. Like in a few cases they have when the writer of the song owns um the original publishing on it. But this music supervisor, Ralph Saul, he was doing a tribute album with Sir Paul, an album where people were covering Paul McCartney songs. And so he had a connection to him. He wasn't working with him that much directly, but he did have a conversation with him about how we wanted to use that song, Live and Let Die, let's say the name. Um, and Paul McCartney said, oh, well, MGM only owns the master. They don't own the publishing. And because we had tried the Guns N' Roses version and it didn't work. Um,
Sure.
but he said, there's another take. We only did two takes of that, but there's another take, the first take. And, you could give that a listen. So we listened to it and it's pretty close. It was missing some of the orchestration, but that's what we used. We used a different take from that session in the movie.
huh.
Wow.
Because I picked up and I was saying to Cam off air that it does sound slightly different.
It is.
Just being a Beatles fan and a Bond fan, it's all in my ear. But
Yeah,
so now you've solved that question I had was why is it very similar but also a bit different? It's because it's a different take.
because he had it. He had the physical copy in his vault.
Hmm.
Wow.
I wonder if that's actually the first time it's actually got published
I,
in a way. In a way.
I've never told anybody about that.
Wow. Okay.
There you go.
There we go. Well, there's another version of Live and Let Die out there. Thank you for that. You gave that to Bond fans everywhere. They don't even know they have it. They've
Yeah,
just got it. There you go.
yeah.
Um, but that leads me on to a follow-up about soundtracks because, and this is just rumor and innuendo on the internet. You can stop it if it's wrong or incorrect. But I'd read that again, another spy great, Layla Schifrin, had written a score for the
Yeah.
film, and it mostly wasn't used in the final product. And I just wanted to know what happened with that.
Well, I mean, that's another story I've never talked about. We did make a deal, and he did um, write a score. And my premise with comedy score is that you can't make something funnier with funny
Mm.
music.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Comedy cues suck the life out of something. And there was just a lot of there was a lot of that. And I said, like, just treat it like a straight ahead, treat it like Mission Impossible, treat it like with all the sobriety. Because we had needle drops for party music. We had
Mhm.
funny stuff that enhanced the lunacy in other parts. But in the action parts, which is what he was scoring, it just needed to be straight ahead. And it wasn't.
Mm,
So
right. So yeah, it sort of
it didn't
undercuts the
work.
scene. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it broke my heart. And I think it didn't sit well with him, but we just didn't use it.
Well,
Right.
ultimately, the buck stops with you. You're the
Yeah.
you're the man in charge. So you made that call for the better of the film. So
Yeah.
ultimately, it is what it is. And as you say, like I mean, you've got needle drops throughout the film. We just had Live and Let Die. We just spoke about, but the score is meant to enhance, not distract. That's the
Yeah.
idea. So
No, and the music that you remember from the movie is Casey and the Sunshine Band coming up
right.
out of the party. You remember
Hmm.
there's an Ema Sumac cue that I loved, and I always wanted to put in a movie where they're racing around and she's singing in that crazy falsetto. So, those are the things that really mattered. And the score was kind of just um, you know, the grout,
Hmm.
in things.
Well, I mean, Cam had a. We were talking again off air about the score and the soundtrack, and there's actually a little bit of music that Cam was talking about. I'll throw it to him on that one.
Yes, I was a big fan of the Muzak version of The Way We Were.
Oh yeah.
In the Barbra Streisand plane, that got a legitimate laugh out of me.
Oh my God. Well, let me tell you, that's another story I've never told anybody. Um, Barbra Streisand is a co-author of Evergreen. She helped
Hmm.
write that song with Paul Williams. So the publishing goes back to her and Paul, and he signed off, but she she said I need to see the movie to approve the usage. So a screening was set up for her. And by the way, I'm the biggest Barbra Streisand fan in the world. And, one of my favorite jokes in the movie is that her plane is in a Craftsman style, like my house is. And
Yeah.
because she obsessively collected Craftsman furniture. And so it was this joke that I don't know, maybe 12 people in the world got is that the plane was decorated in a Craftsman style set. In fact, the table behind me was from the set. The table, a chair, and another table are from that plane set. I bought them off the movie, and the stained glass windows in her in her plane say BS on them. But anyway, so she had to watch that part of the movie. I don't think she watched the whole movie. Uh, and she watched it. Apparently, one of the producers was in the room, and the lights came up afterwards, and she goes, "Funny." That's what she said. And she said, "Yeah, sure, they can have it, but they need to they need to fix one thing in the movie, which is that Michael's character says Barbara Streisand." And she says, it's two equally accented syllables, Streisand. So could they please loop that? And I said, no problem. So she gave us permission.
I was going to ask when you introduce Barbra Streisand's plane and have the music, was there ever any dream of having a cameo, or was that just like not going to happen?
No, we never talked about that.
Yeah, okay. I was
I
just
think he
curious.
was, I think she was busy directing a movie literally at that point, but
Hmm.
no.
I think getting the story about her watching that scene for the music
Yeah.
is enough anyway. That's it's priceless. That's great.
It's one of my favorite things that ever happened.
And also the fact that you've now got that in your house, I think is also pretty
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, Barbara Streisand is a part of your house.
Yeah.
Uh, well, the other thing I suppose we didn't get into is the nuts and bolts of the actual story and what you're taking on. And I know, like, you're not writing the script; you're just making minor changes when you come on board. But was there anything big, sweeping things you wanted to do with this story? Changes you wanted to make, things that did end up seeing the light of day, or anything like that?
No, I mean there was in the original script there was a lot more with this submarine. And
Mm.
it was a monstrous task, like scenes running through the submarine and on top of the submarine. And I just felt like it was the least interesting part to me. So I said, let's do it. That was the concession I made. I said I would rather minimize what happens in that submarine and build just a tiny part of it. And most of it is digital, the submarine. And that allowed us to have more fun in the rest of the movie. That was kind of the big thing I came in with. It was just not a very, you know, sexy, uh, moment, but it was. But I came in and I tried to add more jokes, and I got, a group of comedy writer friends to pitch out jokes and just, if you're going into a movie like that, you expect it to be funny. It better be funny, throughout. Um, but that was really the main thing. And just conducting the whole thing was many, many moving parts. It was a matter of really keeping track of it all. And I know that one thing I really, really tried to do was keep the pace, keep it going, just sort of kind of came at you with a fervor, and it never slowed down except in a few places.
Was it a challenge moving into having large scale action set pieces?
I had done the craft, and there was one huge fight scene in that movie, and there was a lot of technical things in that. So I was used to it. And the first movie I did, Bad Dreams, is a lot of fire, a lot of explosions in it, and so I was comfortable with it. It was just there was more of it. I mean,
Mm.
the doing that fight scene in the craft was a lot of work, and it was hard because we didn't have a huge budget. But
Hmm.
it worked out well. And when silly the MTV Movie Awards Best Fight Scene.
Yeah.
Well, and also just bouncing off of big set pieces and stunts and stuff, you have that giant sort of tidal wave crash at the end.
Yeah.
And I always remember Tom Cruise talking about shooting the first Mission Impossible, and like the hardest thing he's ever done in his career was dealing with that water. Was that hard to deal with shooting all that? Was it easy peasy?
Well, there were different pieces. Them out on the water on the jet ski was a whole separate element. There was a lot of water in the movie. And that was, that's its own kind of nightmare, and you don't know until you know. And I'd never really done water. I think that was the biggest thing
Mm.
is the water's fine. It's the weather and the sunshine, because you can be shooting like this and it's sunny and the water's turquoise, and you turn around and 10 minutes later it's gray and it looks like you're in a different part of the world. So that part's a nightmare. But you just deal with it. I will say this one part was one of my favorite things about shooting. When the wave actually hits the wedding tent,
Hmm.
and various people, including Ryan Reynolds, uh, and Emmy Laybourne, one of my favorite funny people who plays with the crazy bridesmaid. Um, so we had this tent, and it was at a country club or a yacht club in Toronto, and we had this giant, I don't even know how many, several thousand gallon tank. So that would fill up with seawater, and we'd set up a shop, like the buffet table and guests who were all stunt players, and then we would just dunk this water on them and shoot it in high speed. And that was going on for a couple of days while I was shooting dialogue scenes inside with other actors. So I would just come down and watch this thing of like people getting washed away with this giant amount of um, water, and it was hilarious. And it was for fun, like Ryan standing there going like, "Oh, water's coming at me," and Emmy, her character, the bridesmaid, she's drunk and she's like, "Woo, this is so fun." It was, I don't know, it was a really enjoyable process.
Was there any other scenes in the movie that maybe stand out as being big challenges, or the kind of scenes that you maybe like kept you up overnight or anything like that?
There was that huge scene, the one where Casey and the Sunshine Band pop up out of the floor. We built that set, the biggest set I've ever built on anything, and
Hmm.
it took months to build that set, and it was um, I think maybe 20 pages there. And it involved every character in the movie, I think, pretty much every character in the movie, not David Suchet. But it was, and people would be having a conversation in this part of the set, and then the other characters would be there, and then they'd meet in the middle, and it was I'm pretty good at blocking. It's like
Hmm.
a very important thing for a director to be good at, but that stretched my ability. But I just told everybody, you're going to have to show up. And we spent the better part of a day. I think we spent 6 hours rehearsing where everybody was and running through it because there were so many moving parts in that scene. And it went swimmingly, but I remember having anxiety about it beforehand. Now I love that kind of thing, but there's 20 actors. We do a lot of that in so we do Emily in Paris, a lot of big party
Hmm.
scenes, and moving parts, and lots of characters. I'm very used to it.
And the other question I had, just in terms of getting back to the action for a second, was that you, as you said, had the biggest budget you'd ever had at that point. But when you're looking at, say, Bond films or Mission Impossibles, they have a lot of money to throw
Yeah.
into action sequences, and you have here base jumping, you've got the waters, the jet ski chase, things like that. Realizing action on a smaller budget than typically would be afforded to movies that make those their big showstoppers.
Yeah, I know, by the way, our budget, as big as it was a fraction of what a Bond movie would be. But
Hmm.
my premise is you can always make it look good with less money. That's because that's
Hmm.
what you do at film school. You have cardboard and two people and string, and you make something happen. And it's still something I believe in. We did the first season of Emily in Paris for very, very little money, and people thought it looked like it cost 6 times as much. That's really the trick. You find nice locations, you shoot them well, and you find interesting angles, and it makes things look more expensive than they are. And also, we did, a Bond movie is really wall-to-wall action, and ours wasn't,
Hmm.
big action. So,
Right. Yeah, it's like we talked to someone who worked on the original Star Wars not so long ago, and just was referring to like the sets. At the time, they were like, these sets don't look very good.
yeah,
We'll see what this is. And then, of course, it turns into a beloved film that people look
yeah,
to for spectacle. But if you're actually there on set, it didn't look as impressive as,
yeah.
obviously the movies that would come later when they had a lot more money.
It's true. I mean, that's really the trick because I feel like I can go into a ho-hum location and find three really nice angles, and people go, "Oh, it looks good." That's the deal. You have to be able to do that.
Hmm.
I suppose then, sort of wrapping up on the in-laws, a couple of questions I have. Firstly, it's probably, as you say, it was your biggest film to date in terms of budget, in terms of the stars involved. What was it like, the actual process of them putting it out, and your thoughts on the response to it, and that side of things?
Well, the mix was, straight ahead. Um, I think we did a reshoot. Yeah, we did do a reshoot. Um, that in the original script, the David Suchet character basically ate it when the submarine blew up.
Right.
Right.
And so we did this thing, which is he gets out in time and he ends up washed up on the beach because we love that character so much. And it just felt like that's really brutal. And it's funny. It's a funny beat to add to the end of the movie if he um, lives. Um, and then there was also something we reshot, a few little bits and bobs. There was we shot a little bit of Robin Tunney's character because, well, it was just a performance kind of thing where it she did this very, very compelling speech when she reveals herself as being, kind of the bad guy. And too it was it was too dramatic. It wasn't in keeping with the rest of the movie. It was really
Mm.
dark. So we just reshot it and made it a little bit more fun and funny. But yeah, we
And
didn't
I
do much.
go
And
on.
but anyway, mixed the movie, and there was a lot of press, especially for Michael and Albert,
Mhm.
and then I kind of divorced myself from the reviews, but they weren't. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
All right.
Uh, they weren't. It was a disappointing reaction critically
Mhm.
in terms of box office, and that's the sad part of the story. Uh, but I was happy I'd made the movie. I met a lot of wonderful people, and people admired it. My friends liked it. It lives on. People think of it affectionately. I think the really difficult part was the title and it being compared to the original too much,
Mm.
not being regarded on its own. Um,
And and I suppose then my final question on it is, what did making the film teach you, and what doors did that open for you going forward?
it taught me that I could handle a big giant production,
Hmm.
and that I enjoyed that, and that I liked because there were a lot of different kinds of scenes in that movie. It was, kind of musical things, and there were montages, and there were comedy things, and that I liked that. I mean, I look back and I realize that the thing I like the most in a movie that I'm doing is that it's fun. That it pulls you in and
Hmm.
it's dramatic and you believe it and you're interested emotionally, but it should be fun. Um, but I don't know. I felt like I had more confidence going forward after that movie was done that I could really kind of handle anything. Um, yeah.
Well, I had to just ask about this because I'm a huge Arrested Development fan. Just the experience of directing an episode of Arrested Development.
Yeah. I mean, it was actually one of the more challenging things I did because I directed a couple of pilots at that point. I think maybe three or four.
Yeah.
Did the pilot for Grosse Pointe and a couple of other pilots that didn't get picked up. And that's you're like making a movie from scratch. But Arrested Development, and that happened right after Dick. It was around the time of the in-laws, I think. Um, Mitch Hurwitz saw Dick and said, "Do you want to come direct an episode?" And I said, "Yes." And I was such a fan of the show,
Yeah.
but I'd never gone and directed an episode of something that I hadn't helped create. So it was very daunting to come in and, "Hi, you don't know me, but I'm going to boss you around for the next week." And everybody on that show was such an A player, like David Cross, uh, uh, Bateman, like Jessica, all of them. They're all like brilliant. Michael Cera, I was like, this guy's a little genius. And so it was daunting just approaching them. And there was a lot of flux. It was a lot of like the script was laid and then it would get rewritten. So you kind of had to be on your toes. Um, but it was traumatizing. But then and I thought maybe it went badly, honestly, when it was done, because I'd never there was no like, thanks, Andy, you did an amazing job. Everybody just kind of moves on in episodic TV. And and I thought, well, that went badly. Like they hate it. Nobody called me. And a month later or something before the episode aired, I said, well, obviously that went badly. And they're like, no, no, they really liked you. They want you to come back. And I said, well, nobody called me. I was like, it's TV, Andy. They were too busy doing the next episode. They can't do that. And then so I talked to the writer, and he said, no, I loved that episode. It cut together so well, and you found extra jokes. And I was like, wow, it was really traumatizing. But then people really liked the episode.
But it didn't work out for you coming back to do another one.
They wanted me to come back, but
Yeah.
I think I was doing a pilot, and then I think I was doing a movie. But yeah, they asked me to, and I worked with Mitch Hurwitz again on this show called Lady Dynamite on
Hmm.
Netflix, and he's a great guy. I love Mitch, brilliant guy.
And I'll take us out in a couple of questions time, but there's one my wife has asked me to ask because she is a big fan of your film Ideal Home.
Mm.
Mostly for the dynamic of having Steve Coogan and Paul Rudd together, which he thinks is just a lovely pairing. And we're
Yeah.
both fans of both those actors in this household. So, on behalf of my wife, I feel objected to ask because she'll come and find me if I don't. Any stories about putting that film together?
Well, it took many, many years. And I had written it for, I didn't write it for Steve Coogan. I was really thinking it would be some sort of older English actor,
Mm.
that kind of thing. I wrote it for two specific people in mind, and they both passed, and so it kind of sat there for a while. And I had done Hamlet 2 with Steve, and I
Hmm.
suddenly thought, like, what's my problem? Why don't I send this script to Steve Coogan? And he read it and he liked it, and we worked on it for a little while, and then he said, "What about Paul Rudd?" So it was his idea, and Paul really wanted to work with Steve, and it was just that was an amazing. They are such fans of each other
Hmm.
that they would just, even if they weren't in the scene, they would sit and watch them talk, and that they would hang out and gab in between takes and make each other laugh, and that was I love making that movie. I have to say I think that's my favorite thing I've ever done. And nobody's seen that movie. That's very frustrating. It got very nice reviews, but nobody saw it.
It's on Amazon Prime here in the UK, so
Yeah, I
it's picked
think more
up.
people saw it in the UK than
Mm.
here in the US.
We're ahead of the curve here, always.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Okay, well, the last two questions to take us out. Firstly, I was looking at your IMDb. Obviously, Emily in Paris. You've been working on that. What's coming up for you? What are you working on at the moment? What can you share?
Well, my life is Emily in Paris. I've done 5 seasons of Emily in
Hmm.
Paris. We just finished the 5th season, and heading into a sixth, assuming, well, I guess it is. It's not official yet, but probably will be heading into a sixth season. And it really, uh, I go there to France and for 6 months at a time to
Oh
shoot.
no.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't do anything else. Because I'm the directing producer. I'm the executive producer, so I direct the majority of the episodes, but I'm around and help the other directors do the other episodes.
Mhm.
So it's really the most all-consuming job I've ever had. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun. It's nice to be in France. We shot a lot of this last season in Italy and Rome, and then in Venice. Half of the season was in Italy this year. But yeah, I have developed other projects. I wrote a horror movie script that I don't know what I want to do with, a feature. And I develop other things. I sold a pitch recently, um, for a series, but nothing else is shot. A couple of other things I've done in the meantime. I did a season of a show called Uncoupled for Netflix with Neil Patrick
Mhm.
Harris.
Yeah.
And yeah, Emily, that's my life at the
I was
moment.
going to say it sounds like it's mostly Andrew in Paris these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like it.
Yeah. Of all the places to end up, I love Paris myself, so it's not too bad. Now, this is the last question, the question we end all of our interviews on, and we never prep anyone for it, and that's the way I like it because it means there's pressure.
Oh God.
We talk about spy movies here every week. You've talked about your love of James Bond, so you're in good stead already. You're doing well. We want to know, Andrew Fleming, descendant of Ian Fleming, what is your favorite spy movie of all time?
Spy movie? Well, it would be a Bond movie for
Sure.
sure. And now I have to pick one. They're all so good. And I have such a complicated response to each one. Um, you know what? I love Skyfall. I think it's so good because
Mhm.
it feels like the classic Bond movie, but it moved it forward. And yeah, I think that's really good. I mean, there others are incredibly good, but I love that one. It's so well done, every aspect of it.
Do you remember what the first Bond film you saw was? Like the one that introduced you to that world?
I do, and it was in the theater. I saw On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and it was. It's funny. I watched it recently after not having seen it for a long time, and I realized that there were individual things I didn't understand what was going on. I imagine I was, 6 or 7, but individual things really freaked me out as a small child, like him
Mm.
getting shot on the slopes. And there was at one point where somebody froze to death. And there were individual things I
Mhm.
remember, like this was a nightmare that I had when I was a kid. Clearly, um, I should not have been taken to that movie. But
It's one of the darker ones too. That's a
it
bold
is.
choice, yeah, for a young kid.
And Lazenby was he was so good. Underrated, George
Mm.
Lazenby.
Well, I also be remiss now, as you're a bona fide Bond fan, you've proved your credentials just there. What would you like to see happen with the franchise going forward, apart from you
I just hope
directing
they
and
keep moving
and
forward. I
working
mean,
on it?
it's such a dramatic moment in the Bond, history.
Mm.
I just hope they make another one and that it's as good as, as any of the other ones. Um, I feel like it's possible. I feel like the people getting involved are pretty clever,
Hmm.
and I think they all know that the audience won't stand up for anything that's rubbish, to use a British term.
I appreciate you using that. Thank you. I feel at home.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you've got optimism for the future. I mean, your choice of favorite spy movie is Skyfall. I don't think anyone can complain with that. And it's been lovely going through the in-laws with you. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with us, Andrew.
Thank you so much. It was fun and therapeutic. I never spent much time talking about the in-laws.